What's up guys, it's Rowan here from Artist Smart TV, and one of the beliefs that can happen is that to do well in years 11 and 12 you need to quit everything. You know, that you need to dial back, focus on 10 or 12 units only, you know, stop your sport, your work, extracurriculars, and even get rid of your social life, because that's what's required to do well. And today I'm sitting down chatting with Gian, who remarkably did 14 units during her HSC, and on top of that worked 10 hours a week, kept an active social life, was very involved with school, and we're going to find out what some of those commitments were. Now, across all of this, she ended up still scoring an incredible result of an ATAR over 98 for her HSC, which is proof that actually by keeping these other things in your life, you're going to stay mentally healthier, physically healthier, and you can do incredibly well. So welcome, Gian.
Thank you.
Now, I'd love to hear a little bit more. I mean, first of all, 14 units is brave. What subjects were you taking during years 11 and 12?
Okay, so I took chemistry, biology, and advanced math as like the STEM group. And then I did English Advanced and English Extension 1, Modern History and History Extension, and also 2 units of religion. So
we've got a lot going on there. I mean, there's some heavy work in those subjects. Like chemistry, challenging subject. You've got a major work in history extension. Yeah. You've got, you know, modern history, which has a lot of content. You've got a lot of essays. Did everyone tell you not to do it, not to take 14 units?
Yes, I was firmly advised by my careers advisor, my dean of learning, and many adults that I should not do 14 units.
And yet you still persisted. What prompted you to just ignore the advice and push through?
Well, as scary as it was, I think I had to trust in what I knew was right for me. I think that if you have a genuine passion for a subject, you should do it. Like some people won't take drama because they think it won't scale well. I wanted to take the amount of subjects I did because I love them all. And I thought they were all really, really interesting. So I just thought, I mean, if I have the time and if it's feasible in the timetable, why would I not learn? Because I like them.
So then it was feasible, it sounds like, from a timetable. I'm imagining you would have had some early mornings, some after school sort of sessions as part of the mix. Probably 0 free periods as well.
I actually had 2 study periods a week. Great. Because I took history extension, and that was before or after school. But apart from that, everything was in normal school hours.
Now on top of this, I mean, that in and of itself is a lot. You also were engaged in a whole lot of other sort of commitments. I mean, number one, you worked throughout the HSC. Tell us a little bit more about what you were doing and the sort of time commitments that took.
Yeah, so I actually worked in a travel agency, which was an interesting experience in 2020, I have to say. And I was really fortunate that it was something I could do remotely. So throughout online learning, when we weren't at school, I could still do my job. I was running social media, communications, and just working on keeping everyone sane and afloat this year.
And I know from chatting with you, you were saying it was maybe up to 10 hours a week as well, which is decent chunk of time if we think about it. Now on top of that, you were editor-in-chief of your student newspaper. What did that involve?
Okay, so that was a whole bunch of different meetings and organising around 60 students from years 5 to 12. And that was running meetings, editing articles, making sure I was meeting deadlines, and I also did all of the website design as well. So there was some coding, lots of Photoshop, just making sure it was out in the little school community and sent to parents on time.
And was that a weekly, a fortnightly, a monthly sort of turnaround for your newspaper?
That was twice a term, so give or take around once every 5 or 6 weeks.
But it still sounds like a full-time job. There sounds like a lot of stuff that's going on in organising it. So then the big question is, you know, you've kept this. Now, you also danced all the way through. I know you've danced for over 14 years, I think, but you kept that, so you didn't dial back on your dance. So what dance did you do and how often were you dancing?
So I just cut it down to ballet this year. So that was my one compromise, was I used to do a lot more hours of dance. So I stuck with the ballet this year because I thought it was really important for fitness. And I was always told from my teachers that just for mental health, you've got to keep up the exercise. I was always going on walks to accompany that. And I did like lots of little Pilates classes and yoga just at the gym. So I made sure I kept on my feet and thought it was a really good thing that I did to clear my head.
How on earth did you fit all this in? Like, I'm trying to do the maths here, you know, in terms of like you've got work, you've got the newspaper, you've got, you know, dance, yoga, Pilates, like all of this stuff going on. What were your strategies that you used to just manage all of your commitments?
So honestly, I was really shocked when my friends would be telling me that they were getting home and studying for 6 hours a night, because That could seem like a lot of dedication to some people, and it definitely is. But from talking about how they were studying, it was mostly passive study methods, and they were just going through notes, reading and highlighting all of the things that teachers tell you not to do because you don't get the info in your head. I found I could get the same content understood if I was paying attention and taking active notes in class and then doing active revision when I got home. So I kept up flashcards throughout the year, for example. I had a lot of quotes with all of my humanities subjects, and that made it so much more manageable to keep doing it in little chunks.
So step number 1, which I think so underutilized, is you made the best use of class time at school.
Yeah, definitely.
So, I mean, it's the first point of call. So instead of, zoning out, goofing off, doing whatever, you were switched on, soaking up every little thing you could there as your first sort of line of study, almost. And then second step is you were going home, it sounds like iteratively creating flashcards. Yeah. Were they almost your notes then, where you were sort of summarizing your understanding, or did you have notes separately to flashcards?
No, personally for me, I didn't feel like writing down all of the subject notes was a very worthwhile activity, especially for things like modern history. You've got so much content. You only want to focus on learning the things that you don't remember. So I found that using flashcards, which did turn out to be my notes, I could just go over what I did and what I didn't know, and I didn't need to waste time reading a page that I'd memorized a year ago. I didn't need to do that, and it would have just taken up time I didn't have.
So then your study each sort of evening, or we'll talk about when and what that looked like in a moment, was almost by exception. It was, what do I not know, or do I not remember particularly well, rather than just going through the sort of, the road of just going over everything. Is that correct? Yeah. And so then that's what made it onto your flashcards. It was, okay, I didn't really get that thing that we covered today. I'm going to turn that into a flashcard. And then that flashcard would sit there, I'm assuming, ready for assessment, or were you actually using that, during the week as well then to test yourself as part of that active study?
I actually tended to carry palm cards around in my blazer pocket. I'd always have a chunk of my palm cards, especially if you're sitting down, if there's an assembly and you don't have much else to do, just flipping through them whenever you just have a free moment and you're not doing anything. It was just that constantly kind of thinking about it that made sure I didn't forget the basic details. If you leave it before the assessments, no matter how long you leave it, like even if you have like a chunk of 6 weeks before an assessment and you say, I'm going to revise from now, you've already lost all of that content.
I mean, I think that's really powerful, because when you have so many commitments, you're really needing to sort of find the moments, and I imagine there's quite a lot that add up across a day where you're not doing anything, you're waiting for something else, and so often the default is pull your phone out, just whittle away time. And so it sounds like what you were doing was turning that into productive time, where you were going, all right, I've got my study pack with me, it's mobile. And you were getting some study done. Now, in that case, was there a way you were prioritizing the flashcards? So you'd have like a certain set of flashcards for a subject, and you'd take a certain subject with you on a given day? Because I imagine you'd have a lot of flashcards for a lot of subjects. You couldn't carry them all with you.
No, I had a big box at home that I sorted all of the different palm cards in. And honestly, it was just what I felt like I wasn't sure of. I didn't have any rhyme or reason to which ones that I picked. I just found that even the act of having them there so that if I had a moment I could study, it was just a bit of a reassurance. Like if I had a double of history extension, like in the afternoon, I might pick that up the next morning because I knew that I wouldn't have a lesson for another week going around.
You'd want to just refresh it and embed it. Now, it seems like maybe a thing that we've just not talked about, but maybe we've just sort of taken as an assumption, but I think we should unpack, is I feel like you would have had to be very organized from a scheduling point of view to manage all of the commitments that you've had, right? Because you weren't only managing your own commitments. In the case of managing the newspaper, being the editor-in-chief, you were also coordinating all of these other people and their work. So how did you manage your time in terms of scheduling? What tools did you use, and what advice would you give for other students that are, maybe struggling to manage all the commitments that they have?
Yeah, so I found that I had a large timetable in the form of like an Excel spreadsheet, and what I did was I actually made that my desktop background on my laptop once I'd figured everything out. I put all of my periods in, and I treated after school time the same as like school periods. So we have 1 to 6 periods in a day. I would make that like 0 to 10, so I could just schedule everything out. And I would schedule in times that would be study or free time. And as much as that wasn't always set in stone, just having the idea of what I should be doing would get me back on track sometimes, or would make a mental note that I had to switch something around. So I made a big timetable as if my whole week was of classes, and I just kept for that, and all of my activities had a colour, and I'd never skimp out of those. So those were just like set in stone.
So they were like non-negotiable. It was like, I've got this commitment, whether or not it was dance, whether or not it was yoga.
It always happened. I always
Work, with work fairly set in terms of the times as well, that you're like, okay, I'm going to do some work here and now.
Yeah, always. Otherwise, I just forget to do something. So big timetable for the whole week. I just set out my hours. I put in the non-negotiables, and then I put in the flexible time that I have around that. And I wouldn't say, okay, Saturdays are for biology study. No, it would just be study block.
Chunk of time, and then you would basically be defining on that day, okay, the priority today now is English or biology or whatever it was, but you had the blocks of time, which is really critical. So a couple of things that I'm hearing, which is really awesome. One is you've kept something that was working for you, right? You know that you're doing periods every day, and you've been doing it for however many years at school. So why change that, right? It's like, okay, well, let's keep that flowing throughout the rest of the day, so you're not trying to recreate an entirely new set of habits. You can leverage that. And then what you've done is put in your non-negotiables, which is awesome. That's something that I feel like I bang on about so often with students, is like, hey, get your other stuff in, because you still need to do life. It shouldn't be this thing where everything else gets pushed. So you put your non-negotiables in, and then what if, though, you were doing some study and you had an assessment and you had a non-negotiable? So let's say it's Tuesday and you've got Wednesday in assessment, and you discover, oh, bummer, I'm not as well prepared as I thought, but I have a ballet class this afternoon. How would you handle that?
So I definitely, before assessment times, gave myself some leniency with that. So as much as I had my non-negotiables, it was also all about prioritizing. So if I honestly had done my best to negotiate my time, but I had a ballet class the day before an assessment, I'm not gonna lie, I would definitely skip out on that class. That's not because in my head it wasn't as important, it was just because I made the whole timetable to help me with prioritizing. And if I had to rearrange that, it wasn't set in stone, that would be the best thing to do.
It was on your desktop as your sort of save, as the background, so you could see it all the time. Is that the reason?
It was my lock screen and it was my home screen. I made it all nice and pretty so that I'd like looking at it. Just put the whole table there with a nice background behind it. I made it very aesthetically pleasing. Actually made a couple for other people as well. So we all had our desktops going with the timetables just set on each screen.
And how important do you think that was for you, just in helping you sort of stay focused and get your work done?
Super important. I think it just kept me in the mindset. Like, even if I would be just scrolling through the internet and I click back to my desktop, I see what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm like, okay, let's do that for a little bit.
Let's get back on track. Nice. So then just sort of digging in a little bit more, one of the things that you're saying is that you were somewhat flexible. So as you got into assessment periods, some of the commitments needed to give a little. So I'm assuming pre-trials, pre-HSC, what sort of commitments did you end up sort of dialing back a little bit on?
So I think what I dialed back on would be probably the extracurriculars that were outside of school. And then, of course, before HSC, I didn't find that much of a problem because suddenly I don't have all of the school extracurriculars. That was the freest and the most study time I've ever had in my life. It was wonderful. But like pre-trials, for example, I would skip out on some of those things that would be the day before an assessment. Anything on the weekend was always fine. I have ballet on Saturday mornings, that always stuck there, even if I had an assessment on Monday. So it was really only if I had an assessment the day after something and I just wanted to focus. It was more for a peace and a calm of mind rather than, oh, I need to rush and study. It was more just knowing myself and knowing if I needed to be a little bit more calm and just take some time out. If I skipped out on a class, it wasn't necessarily for that extra hour of study. It might just be so I can lie on my bed and stare at my ceiling, listening to some music for a bit.
That's cool. So how important do you think it was then across the whole year 11 and 12 journey really for you to maintain all of these commitments?
It was really important to me because I felt that it actually gave me an advantage in the things that I was doing as well. Like, I do debating as an extracurricular, and that helped so much with English speeches and viva voces and religion. So I didn't want to give up on any of the things that I loved for the skills that they had given me. And I felt that even just things like chess and strategic games club, that was so much fun, and it just zoned out. So I treated everything as having its own unique value apart from just something that I do for a resume.
And it sounds like when you used an interesting word there where it was like zoned out, not in a bad way, I think, but like you're sort of not paying attention, but it sounds like what it was doing was also giving you a break from the academic rigors in terms of the HSC itself, so that you had some space to just unwind in a different way and then be refreshed. How did you manage your energy levels? Because I think when people think 14 units, I think, I'm already worried about burning out, and 14 units is so much. What were you doing just to keep your energy high?
So, I think eating well is an important thing. We always skip over it and everyone says, oh yeah, you have to eat well, but it is very important. So I think that eating well was an important thing, and making sure that I didn't neglect that even if I was studying. If I'm studying in the evening and mum calls you down for dinner, I'm gonna go. I'm not just gonna sit and stay, because that's bad for your mental health as well. And then for zoning out, to just take my own time, it would normally be a little bit before bed. I just kind of played different tones of music that was suiting whichever mood I was in. Like if I was studying, I'd have some upbeat songs on, and if it was before bed, just something soothing. I like classical music a lot. So I think that music is one of those underrated things that can really regulate that energy level. And for me personally, it helps a lot. My mood is very affected by the music I'm listening to. So throughout the day, if I'm feeling a little down, playing something upbeat just gets you right back up again.
That's awesome. It's a great little hack to just stay elevated. Any other advice or tips that you would have for students just in balancing commitments while staying healthy right over the course of year 11 and 12?
I think that as much as it's important to keep up, it's also important to know yourself and know what's going to work best for you. I did a lot because that's what worked best for me. I like to stay busy. I felt that if I had more free time, I wouldn't be using my other time productively. And that was what worked for me. But honestly, if you don't think that you can do all of your extracurriculars, don't be afraid to cut back, because it's not disappointing anyone. Everyone just wants you to succeed in your own thing. Like whenever I had to cut back on something, no one ever thought less, because it's what matters to you. So just taking the time to know what your own personal limits are and not being afraid to take a step back is important. And then you just have to temper that with remembering your passions and keeping up the things that you love.